When I was weak, you made me strong. I fell down. Your love carried me on. Like this darkest night, shine light on me. I grew up in a Christian home, and my parents took us to church on a regular basis. Actually grew up Episcopalian, so I was confirmed and all the other stuff, but I never really understood what it meant. It was all just processes and rituals, and there was really no relationship with God that came with that for me. For others, it may have come that way, but for me, it was always just a next step in a class and the next thing to do, and it wasn't about actually knowing who God was and who he was in my life. So later years, it became easier to just fall away from that teaching because, it's easier to fall away from a teaching than it is to fall away from a friend. And now today, I know Jesus Christ is a friend. And so that's the bond that holds the things together, to understand that a friend would do this stuff, for you, that he would die for you. But my earlier years, I grew up knowing who God was through the church. There's no strength in me without you. Early on, spiritual mentors were, I remember we had a priest at the church. His name was Father Draper. And he was probably one of the earliest mentors. I think when you talk about humility and humbleness, Father Draper was the epitome of that. And I just remember I loved him so much. He was such a great guy. He had Parkinson's disease, and I was an altar boy at the time. And once again, still there's no relationship, with God. But with Father Draper, there was just this connection. And I remember that I would be standing next to him while somebody was reading something, and he would be rocking back and forth. And I remember I would watch his hands and he would just shake and shake, and I remember my heart just going out to him because you could see that even as he was deteriorating, he wasn't deteriorating in his relationship with God. And I think that really stood out to me even to this day. It still stands out to me that, it doesn't matter what's happening in our lives today. The relationship that we have with God can maintain us through anything. And it's the one string that we have to stay attached to no matter what falls apart in our lives. Definitely before I was a very selfish individual. And especially when you get into the drug lifestyle, it's all about what the world can do for me. God really had to help me change that into what he could do through me for the world. And that's where being a true servant for God came from. I had to understand that in order to serve God, I had to have God. And in order to have God, I had to surrender to God. And once you surrender to God, then you can actually be a servant to others. Some of the best leaders have been the greatest followers. If you know how to be a follower, then you know how to be a leader. God, when Jesus said, "Follow me," it was the first step to teaching those 12 men that they were also going to be leaders. And I think that to actually step back, high school football star, you excel at everything that you do. You have this me, complex. And at some point God had to show me that those things were not for me. Those things were for him. And that he was going to turn and take those things and use them for others. And I think that was probably one of the biggest changes that I needed to make in this walk with God, was the true meaning of how to be a servant. It's not, being a servant isn't being a doormat, because a servant is also a leader. But a servant teaches other people how to be servants. As we follow, we lead.